and I'm co-chairing along with two really wonderful guys, Mike Brennan, who's over here, and Aaron Johnson. Where are you? Aaron is right here. And as you can see, their pictures are up here. If you have any questions about HotPETS today, whether you're an author or a to-be author at HotPETS, please come chat up any of the three of us. We'd be happy to talk to you about the process and about the program today. HotPETS is a little bit different than PETS. Our goals are slightly different. We're interested in fostering new ideas and driving discussion and really offering an opportunity for the community to get involved in the newest ideas and offer opinions and questions at the early stages of research. We're interested in controversial ideas. This is really an opportunity for authors to bring us the newest, most interesting controversial ideas that they have before they go on to submit something to HotPETS, for example. We're also interested in fostering debates here today. So as you'll notice, or I'll tell you in a little bit about exactly how the program will go, we have a shorter time for presentations and then a longer time available for questions and discussions. Please do use the microphones in the middle of the room and ask really great questions. This year, HotPETS is a little bit different than the way we've done it over the last 2 years. We changed from more of a paper format to a bit more like a social science abstract format. Papers were 2 pages, and we also did not have a program committee this year. Mike, Aaron, and I made all of the final acceptance decisions about what papers we wanted to have. You can think of this as a bit more of a juried approach. Because of this approach, we were able to really pick and choose papers, not necessarily based on them being the best research, but for an entire program that would achieve the goals of HotPETS that I talked about before. We really were interested in papers that were diverse in terms of the ideas and perspectives, so we wanted to have people from the legal community, from the psychology community, from the journalist and activist community present at the meeting today and for part of the discussion. So you'll see that reflected in the authors. We also, again, wanted to have you, the audience, be part of our program today, which is why we made sure that we had plenty of time for discussion. And then we were also trying to make sure that the newest research had a venue to be discussed. And again, the other part of that was to get more communities from outside the traditional PETS communities talking about these issues. We had 19 fantastic submissions. We were really impressed by the quality of all of the submissions, and we accepted 9 papers that will be presented, or 9 abstracts that will be presented today. Our program goes as follows. We have 4 sessions and a keynote speaker. The first session this morning that will start in just a few minutes will be on censorship and anonymity. After that, Matt Blaze will give us a keynote. Session 2 will be on data privacy tools. Then we'll move on to privacy and secure communication and privacy and human behavior. All of the accepted abstracts are available on the PET Symposium website. We have a couple of traditions here at HotPETS. One of them I'd like to make special note of this morning is that we give a Best Presentation Award. So this will be an audience vote. At the end of the HotPETS today, we'll query all of you for who you think gave the best presentation. So be taking notes throughout and paying attention and let us know who you think gave the best presentation. We also have the tradition of an ice cream break later this afternoon. And new this year, we have our hot breakfast, which I think should be something we do from now on. If you're an author, please do meet with your session chairs in advance so that everything runs smoothly today. I know Meredith has already met with the authors that are going to be speaking in just a moment. Susan, I think you've already met with Matt. If you're speaking in session 3, no? Please speak with Tariq, who's here. He can raise his hand. Session 4, Claudia, thank you. And session 5 will be Kat. Thanks very much, Kat. As I mentioned before, the talk format will be a 15-minute talk and then 10 minutes for discussion. Talks and discussion will be 25 minutes total, and our session chairs will be paying conscientious attention to that. We do encourage discussion today. As a note, especially for a privacy community like this, we're very respectful of authors' preferences to not be recorded. Some authors have opted to not have their talks recorded. Please don't record their talks if they've opted that way. Q&A, as a general rule, will not be recorded today. However, we do have media present throughout the day today, and we cannot guarantee that they will not be recording what you say, but we do know that we have a relationship with some of those media, and we've asked them to respect the preferences of the authors. But just so you know, to feel comfortable asking whatever controversial questions you can, that part we don't plan to record. I'd like to wrap up by thanking quite a few organizations and people. We're very thankful to have the sponsorship of the National Science Foundation, Google, Drexel University, and Silent Circle. I'd also like to especially thank the PETS board for their advice about HotPETS and throughout the process, Rachel for doing a fantastic job organizing, the program chairs, Apu and Stephen, and Jeremy for being incredibly responsive webmaster and really helping us get all of the information to authors and chairs. We'd also like to thank Matt in advance for his keynote, our session chairs, Meredith, Susan, Treat, Claudia, and Kat, and all of the contributors who made HotPETS today possible, the authors and speakers. Thank you so much, and welcome to HotPETS.
Hi, good morning, Philadelphia. I'm going to be your MC today, and I'm really excited to be introducing 3 really interesting and I think relevant papers. The first will be Sadia Afros, discussing censorship arm race, research versus practice. So how do we know what we think we know about censorship in a number of complex, dynamic, and faraway places? From a lab in Philly, what cultural assumptions and other notions are we projecting onto people we haven't met? And how do we know that and design around it so that people can actually use these tools? So Sadia.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Sadia Afroz. I'm a postdoc from UC Berkeley. I'm going to talk about censorship arms race. This is an ongoing work with David Fifield, Michael Shantz, Vern Paxson, and Doug Tiger. So, at first, let me give a typical example of a censorship arms race. Alice wants to visit a site that some censor does not like. So, the censor blocks her access to the site. Alice figures out that she can use anonymity tools like Tor to access these sites. And to a censor, these IP addresses to Tor would look like some IP addresses that do not belong to forbidden.com. So at first, censors do not block access to Tor. But eventually, censors figure out that these IP addresses are publicly available, so they download the list of the public relays and block Alice's access to Tor. Now, Alice has to figure out how to access Tor without using the public relays, and there's a way to do it. Tor also have non-public relays, which are known as bridges, so Alice can get some bridges and access to Tor. But censors, on the other hand, has ways to figure out these bridge addresses. The censor can access the Tor, probe the Tor network and find out the bridge addresses, and after that, they can block all the bridge addresses, and Alice has no way to go to Tor. Now notice here, the arms race is getting more complex and costly over time. It is costly for Tor to distribute these bridge addresses to all the users and avoid the censors along the way. And it's also costly for the censor to discover these bridge addresses because they cannot just go somewhere and download a list. They have to act as a user and then active probe the system to find these bridge addresses. There are many approaches proposed, both by academics and practitioners, to circumvent censorship. These approaches mostly rely on hiding different properties of the connections from the censor. Some of these circumvention approaches are already deployed. Some of these research approaches need to be deployed. So as a developer, how do you know which tool you want to choose to deploy? And as a user, how do you choose any particular system to use? So we want the answer of these two questions. We want to know how well a circumvention system works or will work in practice, and how does it compare to other systems? So to answer these questions, we wanted to understand the quality of the arms race that has been played out so far. There are not a lot of tools out there that people use for censorship circumventions. So we looked at, historically, how Tor has been blocked by different censors. We enumerated all the different attacks that blocked access to Tor. When a country blocks Tor, people report it on the Tor mailing list or the Tor bug track, and then some Tor people write a blog about it. So we downloaded all the posts from the Tor blogs and all the posts from the mailing list, and then wrote a simple machine learning tool to exhaustively search all of this posts to find censorship events. So far, we found 32 known attacks on Tor. These attacks fall under 3 broad categories. First, censors try to find specific properties of the endpoint that Tor uses and other systems that are not Tor do not. For example, they look for the domain name of the Tor blog or Tor site and the IP port of the Tor relays, bridges, and director authorities. This is one of the most common ways of blocking access to Tor. This happened in 15 of the 32 cases that we found. The second way of blocking Tor is to look for the specific properties of the protocol. For example, the specific cipher suite that Tor uses in their TLS handshake, or Tor's SSL certificate lifetime. Or Tor can be blocked by blocking the entire SSL and TLS protocol. This is also pretty common. It happened 14 of the 32 cases. The third way of blocking Tor is unplugging the internet, which is understandably not very popular. So far, we found 3 cases of this happening. So from this survey of attack, you can see that censors look for the simplest features that they can find to block these censorship circumvention systems. All of these features are very scalable because censor has to apply this on an internet scale. They have very low operational cost and they have low collateral damage in most cases. But discovering this feature might be costly for the censor. It needs manual effort. Because, for example, the censor needs to download the list of the Tor relays, or they need to do active probing to find the bridge addresses, or they need to analyze the TLS handshake to find that specific cipher suite that Tor uses. So now we wanted to check what is the focus of research in censorship circumvention. So we surveyed 34 academic and practical censorship circumvention approaches. Our list includes papers from academic conferences. It includes Tor pluggable transports and different Tor versions. We consider different versions of Tor as different systems because some of these versions changed to circumvent some kind of censorship. Our list includes 21 research papers and 13 practical systems. 16 of these research papers are not deployed. It includes papers like Skype Morph and OSS. 8 of these tools do not have any published papers. It includes different versions of Ops proxy, different versions of Tor, and 5 of these approaches have both research papers and they are deployed. This includes papers like Flash proxy and domain fronting. What we wanted to see in our survey is that we wanted to know what kind of attack does it protect against and how. On the attack side, we wanted to see, does this approach protect against IP address-based blocking, or protocol-based blocking, or content-based blocking? We are also interested to know, how does the system implement the censorship technology? So far, we found that all these censorship circumvention systems divide into 2 main categories. One is polymorphism, that they try to change a feature to make it look different from a disallowed traffic. And the other approach is steganography, where they change the feature to make it look like something else. One example of a polymorphic system would be Ops proxy. It does not make Tor traffic look like something else. It just encrypts the TCP connection. An example of a steganographic system would be Skype morph because it changes the Tor traffic to look like Skype. So let's look at whether research proposals differ from the deployed system in terms of the kind of features they use and the kind of techniques they use. Here in the graph, the blue bars represent the deployed systems and the green bars represent the research systems. You'll notice that research deployed system mostly focus on simple features like Flash proxy and VPN gate relies on polymorphism of endpoints. They create many, many addresses that are hard for the sensors to block. Another popular way is to do polymorphism on content, like ops proxy, just an encryption layer on top of TCP layer. As opposed to research system, they mostly focus on steganography on content. Now, steganography in itself is not costly, but it depends on the complexity of the feature. For example, at one point, Tor was getting blocked by Iran by looking at the Diffie-Hellman parameter on TLS handshake. And Tor just changed the Diffie-Hellman parameter to make it look like Apache mod SSL. This is, in essence, steganography, but it's steganography on a very simple feature. As opposed to the research papers, they do steganography on flow-level features. They try to make distributions of packet sizes or packet timing to match with some other distributions, and that is very costly. We believe that this disconnect between research and practice exists because of two main reasons. Research emphasizes development cost, whereas sensors like to emphasize operational cost. Finding the simple feature is a tedious process for researchers, but for sensors, it's very useful because they need to apply this system on an internet-wide. The other reason for this gap is that researchers focus on the end game, whereas sensors and practitioners are interested to just staying ahead in the arms race. This focus on the end game is very important and useful, but it might not help us to face the arms race that we are facing today. So, we think that this gap exists. This gap is not obvious to the researchers when they're writing their research papers and when they're evaluating their system because they're not considering the right evaluation criteria. So one way to mitigate this gap is to come up with the right evaluation criteria that will help researchers to discover this gap while they're doing their research. So before coming up with our own evaluation criteria, we surveyed research papers in censorship circumvention to see how do they evaluate their systems. So far, we surveyed 50 papers, and we found at least 60 different ways of evaluating their systems. Different papers use different evaluation criteria to evaluate their systems, which is understandable. For example, suppose you have a system that relies on polymorphism of different IP addresses, and you would not want to evaluate the system to see whether it looks like Skype, because that just does not make sense. So these 60 categories fall under some broad categories. First, many papers look at resistance to known attacks. They look at cost of the evaders to run the system. They look at collateral damage of the sensor, which is very important. They are also interested in performance of their system. Does it make things slower for the users? Another popular evaluation criteria is traffic analysis that looks at distribution of different packet flow level features. And another interesting criteria is the usability of the system. This aggregated list of 60 criteria is very good and it's very complete. But the problem is that all the papers don't use all the criteria. For example, out of the 50 papers, only 15 looked at resistance to known attacks. So, on top of these criteria, we came up with two holistic criteria. One is the total cost of the system. That would include the user's cost, the system maintainer's cost, and also the sensor's cost of blocking the system. We expect that this will encourage the researchers to look for the cheapest features that a sensor can use to block their system. The second criteria is more abstract than cost. We call it goodput. It tries to estimate how much productive traffic a censorship system enables. For example, you have two systems, A and B. A has a very cheap feature that any sensor can find to block it. But finding that feature is very hard and complicated. And maybe the sensor is not very motivated to find that feature. So even though technically it's very easy to block that system, because the sensors are not motivated to find it, A will be used more by users than other systems. So we started to see how can we estimate sensors cost. When we started this project, we thought that we will estimate sensors cost by looking at how long it takes for a sensor to block some specific system and use time as a proxy for cost. So we decided that we will look at the TOR metric and see how long it takes different countries, for example China, to block specific versions of TOR. What we discovered from this experience, from this exercise, is that sensors do not block a system as soon as they can. They block systems when they need to. So they will not jump on and block TOR as soon as a new version comes up. They will probably figure out how to block it and then block it when they need it. So by looking at the timing, it's very hard to estimate how long it took them to block a system. Another things that we looked at are cost of different surveillance tools like Blue Code or FinFisher, but that also did not seem very helpful because we don't know what kind of version different countries are using. But these are good sources that can give us some estimates. So that ends my talk. I hope I asked more questions than I answered them, and I will end with two more questions. What do you think should be an effective evaluation criteria? We tried to find all the blocking events, but I'm sure we missed many. So if you know of any other blocking events, let us know. There is a list of the events that we found that's in that URL. And also, we are continuing our survey. And if you are a censorship circumvention researchers, if you wrote a paper or a tool, expect email from us. And that's my talk. Thank you.
Talk to you about some really exciting work that happened to do with some of my colleagues listed on the screen and some that aren't listed on the screen. I'm here to talk to you about a usability study. This is the usability study on TOR, and specifically a usability study on TOR for circumventing censorship. I'm going to start off my talk with a clip from a pilot of the study that we ran earlier. As you can see, we got our users in a lab and we instructed them to do things like download, install, and, oh my goodness, use the Tor browser. We were actually going to show you a video which had all of these subtitles. Oh, there we go. Oh, really? Oh, okay. Let me start over. Sorry about that.
You were talking about usability?
Here we go. We got a bunch of people in a lab, specifically 5 journalists, and we got them to install, use, and try to understand what all of Tor is about. So here you see someone searching for onions, and some people trying to go through the advanced menu, and obviously noting how advanced these settings are. And through this study, we actually get raw access to what people are actually thinking as they go through and use the Tor browser. And some of it is quite funny, and some of it is actually quite helpful. We got to see a lot of things that really work, like this button here. People really like the fact that it's purple. I should click on it because it's purple. You know, this might seem silly, but this is the one part of the experiment that everyone got right. So it is good to know simple things that work. And having this raw access to what people are thinking about is really great. We did this in the form of a cognitive walkthrough. We sat people down and we instructed them to talk out loud. We gave them a dummy task to do this. We did this ourselves to illustrate why this is useful and what it's useful for us to hear. And as you can see, it's really good to get insight into what people think. For example, here's a person that actually listens to what you're saying, even if it doesn't make sense to them, because you're yelling at them. But this is great. Users don't always have the broadest view of what's going on, and when they don't understand, it's good for you to tell them what is important. We found a lot of problems, and especially some sort of conflict between usable security settings for the Mac, which prevents malicious things on the internet from randomly executing on your computer, and being able to use the Tor browser. And we found all of these other problems while we were running the study, and it's actually quite helpful to see. This was especially confusing to one of our users because they didn't even think that Tor was a browser, and they thought they were on Safari and all this kind of stuff. I think, to illustrate one point, this is something that we really don't want happening. This is one of our core users, participant number 4, who's really trying to find the onion menu. He's trying to find that little onion thing right next to the address bar, and we spent a good amount of time watching him and going along for the journey that he goes through to search for this button. And it's actually kind of funny, so just watch and see what happens. Spoiler, he actually ends up finding it. Come on, you can do it, man. Oh, yes. It's not all fun and games, of course. Poor participant number 4 spent about 9 minutes searching for that button. But it is something to note that maybe he wouldn't have found that button unless he was in a laboratory setting where there was a researcher asking him to complete all these tasks. And to make that a little bit easier for people, we worked with Tor developers and we actually wrote a bunch of tickets. We got a lot of them done, and the latest pushes and these changes to usability can be found on the latest download of Tor browser. So it's a little bit more usable than before, which I'm quite excited about. Now, you should be looking at me funny right now because you'll have noticed that I told you that I'm talking about a usability study. Talking about a usability study on Tor, but I told you that I was talking about a usability study on Tor for censorship circumvention. There was none of that in the pilot study for the censorship circumvention study. And this is because originally our vision was to really test the usability of all of Tor. And we quickly found that maybe that's a little bit too much. We found a lot of good problems, but with a small sample size and a lot of areas that people are confused about, we only got a sampling of what could go wrong, not necessarily insight into exactly how to fix it, how to test it, how to make it more useful. So from this pilot, we decided to focus on one area of the Tor browser, specifically how people would configure Tor to use it as a censorship circumvention tool. Not only is this a more narrow focus that we can test more thoroughly, but I believe that this is just something we need to do right now. And why do we need this right now? Well, if you ask me, Linda, on the street, I would say, well, because people need to use this. People aren't getting access to free information, and people are having a really hard time getting to these things. I want people to live their life, whether it be checking cool facts on Wikipedia or posting silly pictures to Facebook. And if you ask me, the researcher, I would also say then, this is a good time right now because censorship is happening. It's new. There's an arms race, just like Sadi talked about, and we need to be a part of it, and we need to include the user in the equation. And let's talk about usability for a second. I want to say that usability is hard. Not a lot of people get it right. It's hard because there's an abstraction layer. I know everyone in here is technical, and you all know about layer 7 and what you have to do to get like from 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you can think of the laptop that this user is holding as the endpoint. I prefer to think of it as the user. Somehow you need to get the information from all of these machines onto the laptop and leap out at the user. And I think that's the biggest abstraction layer. You need to have controls which are meaningful that give some sort of limited insight into how the system actually works so their mental model doesn't conflict with how the system works. And in the best case, we can even form mental models of how censorship circumvention might work or what analogies we can use. For encryption, we have things like little keys and envelopes flying through the air. For censorship circumvention, we don't have that yet. And being on the forefront, we can potentially even have the possibility to shape all these notions. So we're going to be testing this configuration window, and what better way to do it than literally just make 100 or maybe more, 200 people just actually go through this. And how are we going to do this? Well, we thought of a really cool idea. We're really going to recruit people off the street, non-technical people, hundreds of them, and we're going to put them in a room. We're going to build firewalls and put them in a censorship circumvention environment. We're going to block them, tell them that they're being blocked, and just ask them to complete some really simple tasks. And the key is that they can't do it unless they complete the code correctly. I think it's going to be really interesting. Of course, we can't do a cognitive walkthrough like we did before because we hope to have hundreds and hundreds of users. We plan to do things like build in a plugin that measures the percent of success that people have in configuring Tor, how long it took them, how many options that they tried before getting there. And we also want to follow up with a survey to see what was confusing, if it was easy for them. We also want to maybe follow up with additional participants. We'd like input from all of these things. Right now, we plan to have 3 different censorship environments to put people into. First of all, we're going to put people into a corporate network which only allows HTTP, HTTPS, and DNS. Those will be the lucky people. Other people will be put in a DNS-only censor environment, in which some queries to DNS will just be blocked or be poisoned. And some people, we're going to tell them, hey, you want to go to Facebook? And put them into a comprehensive censor environment where we're going to do everything from IP blocking on top of DNS blocking on top of searching for keywords. They're going to come to the lab and be asked to do these things. And you can see, these are things that people would normally know how to do, and that's exactly the point. Because then, any friction that we measure will be based on the interface with Tor. They're not going to struggle typing in Google, and they're going to be familiar with the tasks that are done. We specifically want feedback on what kind of tasks that we can use. Are there any tasks that highlight more meaningful interactions between a client and Tor or a client and server? For example, we can start searching for things on Wikipedia if they search for anything specific. So the goal of this study is not to replicate censorship environments correctly. We're going to put people in a censorship environment so that they have to act in the same way as if they were in an environment that would be censoring in that way. We want to put them in an environment so that we can test all of the different configurations, the different transports, in a meaningful way, and to have tasks that provide insight into how Tor works. I think something that one of my participants really asked me, which offended me at first, but it's very insightful. She asked me, why is Tor French, slow, and dumb? And to which I said, well, there's encryption happening. That's why it's slow. It's French because it thinks you're in France. It has all of these smart features that really none might do. But yeah, we want to get insights into what is confusing about censorship. So the takeaway is that we are running this study. It's going to be hard. Usability is hard. It's going to be hard for Tor because not only is it not the normative browser, you don't track your users, but it's in a different area, and people don't have mental models of it yet. But that's why the best time to do it is now, and I want to do it anyway. So I'm here talking to you because I think it's hard for me. I am a computer science student, so I really want to write plugins. I'm excited to build this firewall, and I'm excited to trap people inside it and see what they say. But I need technical people who have more technical knowledge into Tor and maybe what the best things to communicate are to the people. What technical simple things should be abstracted and what shouldn't be. I need people who are really good at design, and I want them to help me optimize things like learnability, but also help with secure usability features like the ability to recover from mistakes and to even just get through the configuration dialog more quickly. So, I'm going to explicitly talk to you offline or right now, and I want to talk about these things. Thank you very much.
How to detect symbols in Tor. A quick reminder, when I talk about symbols, we mean a bunch of relays, typically a lot of relays, under the control of a single person without the desire to let the world know, right? And these Sybil clusters tend to show up every other week. And sometimes it's possible to figure out why they show up, what the purpose is. They sometimes are simply misconfigured. Somebody fails to specify that all these relays are under my control. Often it's botnets. Well, not often, but it happens. We have seen these cases. Attackers that might want to do something we're not always sure about, and also researchers that we often catch. And another problem which makes it harder is that some attackers make an active attempt to stay under the radar. So this work was motivated by us looking for bad exit relays for 1 to 2 years, and you catch a lot of opportunistic attackers that try to experiment with ways to break certain security guarantees. And there are some who really try to remain undetected, who target specific content, which makes it much, much harder to find them. So this makes all of this quite challenging. And like I said, it's often hard to find out what an attacker actually wants to do. So in general, by having Sybils, you have the privileged position of more exposure to traffic. You might see more exit traffic, or if you're running guard relays, you might be exposed to more clients connecting to you, and you might use this to your advantage. And another point is that a lot of these Sybils try to manipulate the onion service distributed hash table, which is used to implement onion services. And it's not quite as strong as we would like it to be. So if you have a bunch of relays, it's possible to, for example, position yourself at a specific place in a distributed hash table in order to learn more about a hidden service than you probably should be. Or to also gather statistics, for example. And so, like I said earlier, we did a lot of work on finding bad exit relays, and based on that, we had a lot of questions that kept showing up. For example, one is, once you find a single bad relay, you're wondering maybe there are others that do just the exact same thing, but we haven't caught them yet, because maybe they sample traffic in a certain way, which makes it harder to find them, or they do something else in order to stay under the radar. So this is something that always happens. We found one, and now we are trying to find the others that are doing the very same thing, but we haven't caught them yet. Or we have a given group of relays that are interesting to us for some reason or another, and we're interested in learning if they're controlled by the same entity. Or maybe we don't really have such specific questions and we're just trying to learn, or we're just looking at the network consensus at a given point in time, and we're trying to find clusters of relays that might belong together. And we came up with a bunch of passive and active ways to learn these things. And the active ways are rather obvious, even though they are not very polite. So you could do port scans on relays, you could find open ports that are similar across relays. You could do things like passive OS fingerprinting in order to learn if a bunch of relays are running the exact same operating system, or fetching their SSH keys. And all of this is possible, but probably not, it won't be liked by normal relay operators. So we focused more on passive strategies to find these Sybil clusters for now. And what we usually start with is a descriptor or derived information from it. So this is one of these descriptors of one of our relays we run at our institution, and it's just a text blurb. And there is some information in there which we could exploit in order to find similarities. So one is the relay nickname, which is really just a string which is specified by whoever runs the relay. And as it turns out, people who run Sybil clusters are often too lazy to diversify them in a reasonable way. So they're often automatically generated, and it's really easy for humans to find patterns in there, which could lead you to conclude that there might be the same person behind this cluster. We also might want to look at IP addresses. So the idea is basically cost. It takes you more time and probably also more money if you want to get a lot of relays in lots of different networks all over the world, in different countries maybe even. So it's not impossible, it's just a matter of time and money. So the closer relays are together, the higher the idea of similarity in our opinion. We can look at things like version number or platform. Once again, if you have a way to automatically deploy a lot of relays to virtual machines, you will probably use the same operating system, or at least Linux, because it's just harder to use, for example, Windows and Linux at the same time. We could use the fingerprint to find attempts to manipulate the distributed hash table. And what is also quite useful is the uptime, because relays that are under my control as an attacker tend to start and stop at the same time, because I probably have a simple script that I use in order to start all of these relays, and then they come online, and when I'm done with whatever I'm up to, I stop them. So by just looking at when they're online, we might also be able to find these clusters. And bandwidth values turn out to be useful too, especially if they're non-default. And finally, at the bottom, the exit policy. So all these things can be used in one way or another. And to this end, we are working on a tool which we call Sybil Hunter that uses these things and comes up with a bunch of ad hoc metrics, which we use to create similarity matrices, like the one you see here, for example. So this was automatically generated from a consensus a couple weeks ago, and our tool labeled these nodes that are relays as probably belonging together. And the edges in between represent the similarities we found. And inside the nodes you can see the nickname, and in the second line the fingerprint. And we are not completely sure what this is, but it seems to be part of a botnet, maybe. The reason I'm saying this is because all these relays run different flavors of Windows. And they have an identical nickname, and the configuration is also very similar. And there is no contact information or anything else that could maybe indicate who is running that. So maybe it's another instance of having a botnet. And this is where these graphical ways to explore similarities can turn out to be quite useful. And if you remember another question about which other are there that seem to be very similar. And for that, we're experimenting with some ways for nearest neighbor search. So I'm quickly explaining that for the algorithm geeks among you. We have two descriptors, and we compare them by using the Levenshtein distance, which is a very simple distance metric. It just determines how many edit operations we need to turn one string into another string. So how many characters do you have to insert, remove, or replace? And the smaller the number, the more similar the two given strings are. And this we can then plug into something that is called a vantage point tree, which enables us log n lookup, which is quite useful. Because if we have a similarity matrix, like in the previous example, it scales quadratically, which is not very pleasant since we're dealing with about 7,000 relays, so that is a little bit difficult to do for many, many consensuses. And we implemented that and experimented a little bit with it, and what you can see here is a trial run of the tool we're developing. In the very first line, you can see the invocation. So we pointed towards a recent consensus. We say we want to see the 3 nearest neighbors to our own relay we are running at our institution. And it found 3 relays, and luckily the first one is actually the second one we are running. It has an almost identical configuration, which is the reason why it was found. And the distance you can see in orange. So the distance, it doesn't really mean a lot. It's just 14 edit operations to turn one string into another string. And there is a lot of room for improvement. So the actual strings that are compared right now is in light blue. We really just took relay descriptors, we processed them in a way to make it easier for the Levenshtein distance to tell us what we want to know. So this is not very sophisticated right now. And you can see that there are 2 other relays that have nothing to do with our relay, at least as far as I know. And the distance is 17 and 18 respectively. And another thing I mentioned in the beginning is that it's really interesting to look at relay fingerprints, how often a given relay changes its fingerprint over time. And ideally, it never does that. So once you set it up, it gets a fingerprint that is based on its public key, and it never changes. But there are a bunch of relays that actually do change their fingerprint a lot. So we implemented a test that really just looks over past consensuses and looks at these things. And it's really interesting because we have data that is archived since the end of 2007. So we have approximately 8 years worth of data where we can have a look at these things. And we found plenty of relays that change their fingerprint often. So sometimes you can learn what they're up to. For example, I think we found one relay that was run on a home router. I think it was called DDWRT, and it changed it every day or every other week or something. So perhaps the user just rebooted the home router, which led to a new fingerprint being generated. But we also have a lot of cases where we really don't know what's going on. And I took an example here of a relay that changed the fingerprint 20 times, I think, in a month or something, which is quite a lot, and often we don't know. By looking very carefully at the fingerprint and by correlating the data with the location of hidden services, we might be able to tell that this relay is now trying to get into a privileged position in order to be responsible for a hidden service. We haven't done that yet, but that might be one way to find out why these fingerprints keep changing so much. So we have a test for that too, and we keep running it. And it turns out to be really hard to defend against Sybil. So far I only told you about how we can detect them. And there is a lot of existing work on Sybil attacks, and most of them makes use of or exploits social graphs, if you think about online networks like Facebook, or proof-of-work systems. And both don't really work in the case of Tor. So we don't really have an underlying social network. We don't have really relay operators teaming up. So we simply do not have a social graph we could exploit. And proof-of-work systems don't work simply because every machine has its own resources. It's not like in other distributed systems where one entity is able to control where one person is able to control many entities in a network by running a single computer. That's not the case with Tor. So the existing concepts don't really work here. So what is currently happening is once you find those clusters, you send an email to the directory authority operators, and those clusters are blocked manually. And it doesn't work very nicely because the directory authority operators often get tired of getting all these emails from me, and it's error prone, there is a lot of discussion going on, so it's not as efficient as it probably should be. And another way, one way to make it better would be to improve that process or to generally increase the cost of getting into a privileged position. So to make it harder to become a hidden service directory, for example, or an exit relay or a guard relay. But then again, the cost here is really just, in many cases, to wait, right? You set up a relay that is reasonably fast and you wait a couple days and then you're in the position that you want to be. So it's hard to come up with ways here to make it so costly to really make it hard for an attacker. So As a result, we have a lot of questions to you too. So I hope that some of you have suggestions what else to look at or other things to implement for our tool. For example, better algorithms for the similarity metric we're experimenting with. And it's a little bit challenging because what we want is a metric in a mathematical sense, something that satisfies the triangle inequality, which is surprisingly challenging. But at the same time, we want to make use of domain-specific data, or at least not completely ignore it, in order to be better. We can use more data as it is provided by the Onion News service, for example, which we don't yet do. And another issue is that we are working in an adversarial setting. So we are dealing with people who make an attempt to stay under the radar and to game our system. So it's difficult to work with classical machine learning models where our classifier is open, our training data is open. So that is something we have to consider here too. And that brings me to the end of our talk. If you want to learn more, then I would encourage you to go to this URL. So we're experimenting with this as an open science project. So pretty much the entire progress is open. So if you don't want to contact me directly, just feel free to go there. We have the code open as well as periodic email postings to mailing lists. So there isn't really a lot to hide. Thanks.
Very generous and largely fraudulent introduction. So this is going to be a little bit of the technology behind current events and what can we contribute to them talk. So if you're looking for a lot of sort of new insights about privacy technology, you're probably better off just going in the back and talking. So I'm going to talk more about the political layer, which is the privilege that I have in giving a keynote, that I didn't actually have to do anything original to present to you here. But I want to try to start by reconciling two quotes that we've seen. The first is a representative quote. This is repeating a talking point that's been going around for a while from the FBI. And the one I chose was from the FBI director from a talk that he gave in October. And what he said was, unfortunately, the law hasn't kept pace with technology. And this disconnect has created a significant public safety problem. We call it going dark, and what it means is this. Those charged with protecting our people aren't always able to access the evidence we need to prosecute crime and prevent terrorism, even with lawful authority. We have the legal authority to intercept and access communications and information pursuant to court order, but we often lack the ability to do so. Now those you've probably heard some variant of that. The term going dark has been been bantered around for about the last 6 or 7 years. And it's always cast in these terms that this has created not a potential problem in the future, but this is a real current public safety problem right now. That, this is something that has demanded the highest levels of government and law enforcement attention. This is a standard talking point from the FBI every time they testify, every time they give public speeches. This is a top problem. One would think that this is behind, a major epidemic of crimes not being solved, from these words. And yesterday, the wiretap, the 2014 edition of the wiretap report was published. So I had to scramble to change my slides to take out the almost identical paragraph from last year's wiretap report and paste in the paragraph from this year's wiretap report about the question of, well, how dark are wiretaps getting? And in particular, if you're not familiar with the wiretap report, it's a very interesting thing. Since 2000, and with the passing of a couple of pieces of legislation, but it didn't get implemented until 2000. Every year, the US courts have been publishing a report on Title III, that is law enforcement wiretapping in the United States. And the statistics, but every year since 2000, they've been adding to this report that the courts have been publishing, and this is both federal and state and local, but only law enforcement wiretaps. How often has encryption hindered wiretapping? That's one of the things that they gather statistics on. And you'd think, from words like this, that 50% of wiretaps are being thwarted because of encryption and modern information technology, or some very large fraction of wiretaps must be going dark for language like this to be so, not just being used, but be so prominently used. That, to the extent that the FBI has political capital, this is a place where they're spending it to solve this huge problem. So how huge is this problem? Well, if we look at this document from the courts, the statistics that are on wiretapping, and remember that if this is an issue law enforcement wants solved, they have a very strong interest in finding every example to cite of where encryption and modern technology is causing them to go dark. That we would think that they have a strong interest in finding many cases, and maybe even stretching the truth a little bit to make it look like maybe a bigger problem than it is. So we might expect to see in the wiretap report, this staggering number that would cause us to say, wow, they really got a problem, and now we've got some tough public policy choices to make. So here's what this year's says, and it's pretty close to previous years. What it says is, if you can read it, the number of state wiretaps, that is non-federal wiretaps, in which encryption was encountered, decreased from 41 down to 22, in which encryption was encountered. In 2 of these wiretaps, officials were unable to decipher the plain text. 2 in the states. 3 federal wiretaps were reported as being encrypted in 2014. 3, of which 2 could not be decrypted. So if you can add those 2 numbers together, we've got a grand total of 4 wiretaps in 2014 in which encryption prevented the law enforcement from being able to get access to the evidence that they were seeking in criminal cases, and that's across both state and local. Now, how do we reconcile these 2 statements? So one possibility is that somebody's wrong, and that's possible. It's possible that there's more encryption than is being reported in the wiretap report, and it's possible that the FBI director and the entire law enforcement policy apparatus of the federal government are wrong about this being a problem. But it seems unlikely that 2 things like this could coexist side by side so starkly unless something else is going on. So I want to bring back a little bit of history. We've heard this before. In fact, we've actually been hearing this for about 23 years now. My employer in the 1990s was AT&T. I was lucky enough to work at Bell Labs. And I worked in a group that was one of the first groups working on computer security. And to my surprise, one day, AT&T announced a product to do telephone security. And it was called the AT&T Telephone Security Device Model 3600, because AT&T is great at coming up with catchy names for things. And this is what it looked like. I took a picture of mine. I found one that's new in the box, so I have a nice pristine one. And basically, it sits between the phone, if any of you remember wired telephones, they had a separate handset, and the handset, and basically provided encryption. Now this is the sort of James Bond model that included an acoustic coupler, but in the standard model you could just plug in the modular connector of your handset. And basically this was a very clever and surprisingly well thought out device. And it was the very reasonable price of only $1,400 each. In 1992, that was the suggested retail price. And the idea was that you'd buy one of these at each location where you wanted to be able to communicate securely for only $1,400 a pop. It had built into it a 4800 baud modem and some fairly snazzy voice codecs that could, in real time, encode voice at a data rate to get through a 4800-bit connection and have it still sound actually pretty good. It's not quite as good as a modern cell phone call, but pretty good. And it would do a Diffie-Hellman key exchange after setting up a digital connection through the modem. 768 Diffie-Hellman, which in 1992 was still worth something, and display a hash of the Diffie-Hellman on an LCD display on the device. So that's how it handled the man-in-the-middle problem. You would read the hash over the encrypted connection and based on voice recognition with the person you're talking to, you could be pretty sure of this. So this is a pretty well-designed device. And it used DES as the stream encryptor for once the key exchange was established. So 56-bit DES, which again in 1992, people were wondering whether that was good enough, but it was still, certainly good enough to defeat all but the most determined adversary against exhaustive search. And now this was a pretty specialized product, and I think they sold about 100 of them. So that allowed 50 pairs of people to communicate securely. About half of the ones that went out were to people inside AT&T who wanted to play with it. So I have my original model right here that I managed to get them to send me. But I only got one of them, so I never was able to talk to anybody with it. And the others were sold, interestingly, to union officials who were worried about wiretapping. So they sold about 100 of these things. Expensive enough that you're not going to sell too many of them. And the government's reaction was a complete freakout. The President of the United States called the president of AT&T shortly after this device was released. And that's a pretty heady thing to happen. To basically complain about the effect that this little box sold at retail at $1,400 a pop would have on the ability to conduct wiretaps. This will cause wiretaps to become obsolete. We will be unable to solve crime if you continue selling these devices. But don't worry, we've got a solution. It wasn't simply don't sell these. That AT&T probably would have stopped selling them because frankly, AT&T couldn't sell them if they tried. But I think everybody who would have bought one had already bought one by then. But the NSA was asked to hurriedly put together a solution. And the solution was fairly constrained. The solution had to be compatible with the interface of DES and a DES chipset, but solve the problem of wiretapping. Allow authorized wiretapping in, but still be secure against unauthorized wiretapping, whatever that meant. And the solution was something called the clipper chip, and this is what one looks like. Basically, this was a fairly quickly designed interface to a cipher called skipjack that NSA had on the shelf for about 15 years with an 80-bit key size. So assuming that it doesn't have any shortcut attacks, it's a significant improvement over DES at a time when people were thinking the DES 56-bit key might not have been good enough. But had an additional feature, which is that as part of loading the initialization vector, which in a DES-sized codebook is 64 bits long, the initialization vector was 192 bits long, and you'd have to load this in at the time you initialized the key. And the extra 128 bits of the initialization vector that you load in with each new key contained an encrypted copy of your session key, encrypted with keys known to the government that were split in this sort of slightly obvious but also slightly esoteric way, so that it would require the two key halves to be put together. And the idea was that the government would hold these master decryption keys for each chip in escrow, and the term key escrow was born. And the government basically said, you know, this phone is the first prototype, should be the first prototype for this new state-of-the-art encryption standard that everybody will want to use, or maybe be required to use when they include crypto in a product. And so AT&T's reaction to this was, why, you mentioned we have government contracts. We're very enthusiastic about cooperating with you in every way possible. And they recalled all of the TSD 3600s that they had sold to be retrofitted with the clipper chip. I never sent mine back. This is one of the original DES models. It's very, there are like 5 other people out there that I can talk to. One of them is Whit Diffie. He got one, and that's really about it. At this point, 768-bit Diffie-Hellman and 56-bit DES aren't all that exciting, but at the time, this was a real stick-it-to-the-man statement to have your DES encrypted phone. And AT&T basically came out with a new model with the clipper chip installed and proceeded to not sell any of them. The government agreed to buy some fairly significant quantity of these, and they sat in a warehouse somewhere until they finally got released back onto the surplus market about 5 years ago. So I bought about 50 of them for $20 each at a government auction. If anybody wants one of the Clipper phones, talk to me, I can get you a good deal. This was a failure. We spent most of the 90s, if any of you were cryptographers in the 90s and you still remember this, we spent surprisingly little time doing actual cryptography and an awful lot of time arguing about why we should be allowed to do actual cryptography. This was a sort of a denial of service attack on the crypto community of explaining why key escrow is a terrible idea. And one of the reasons that their particular key escrow idea was terrible was that it was implemented in hardware. And the early 1990s were just at the point in history where hardware cryptography stopped being the only way to do it. And software cryptography, implemented on general purpose computers, became pretty practical. So they were basically taking, by requiring or suggesting that they should be requiring a hardware solution to crypto, they're basically taking something that would have zero marginal cost in software and converting it to something that would be fairly expensive because you'd have to do it with this special hardware chip. And that kind of doomed it from the start. They came up with a couple of other ideas, but basically by the end of the 90s, the government essentially gave up, and we didn't hear about key escrow again ever, except then eventually we did. Yeah?
Yeah, wasn't a lot of that also because of the fact that the switch app was classified and had to be, tamper protected and all that?
Yeah, so it was a classified algorithm, classified at the confidential level, and so it had to be protected. So they had perfectly good reasons for wanting to do it this way that made no sense at all in the commercial market. So we're now hearing the same arguments again. That wiretaps, because of all this encryption and all this new technology, wiretaps are about to go dark. And we were hearing this starting pretty much right before Snowden, so their timing was really amazing. But we've been hearing this again. So now we get to have in the 2 decades later, we get to have the same, or we're looming on the cusp of the same denial of service attack against our community. Now, this is, key escrow cryptography is a bad idea, and it's a bad idea for all the obvious reasons, or at least reasons that are obvious probably to the technical community, but perhaps not obvious to the policy community. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time discussing what those reasons are, except in very broad terms, because from a technology point of view, it's kind of obvious why cryptography with a backdoor in it is not going to be as secure, and it's going to be more expensive, it's going to be less reliable. But from a policy perspective, it sounds perfect, right? If we could only develop that master golden key that lets only the FBI and the National Security Agency and only the good guys decrypt communication and our communication content, and keeps the bad guys out, that would be just terrific. So why don't we just go and do that? Well, when you look at this from a technical perspective, you start to scratch the surface of this a little bit, and it becomes really clear why this is a bad idea. I mean, I can list a couple of these. One is that, computer security itself is recognized as a big, fat mess. Right? We are terrible at building things. Computer science is perhaps the only branch of engineering in which having things fail repeatedly after you've sent them to people is just the normal way of doing things. Right? Bridges don't work that way. Buildings don't work that way. But we ship things and we basically say, well, you find the bugs, and that's the normal release process. And from a security perspective, this problem is perhaps worse than it is even from a general reliability perspective. Now, we know how to build, we don't know in general how to build systems that work. We don't know how to build correct software. There are lots of people working on this as a research problem, and we all wish them luck. And some of them are here today, but we're not really ready to deploy that for all of our software, and probably won't be for a while. Today we basically have 2 solutions that work. And backdoors in crypto kind of break both of them. One is crypto, right? One solution is to say, well, we don't care if some parts of our system are insecure because we have most of it protected by cryptography. And that works pretty well. It lets us reduce the number of components in our system whose security we care about. Backdoors in crypto make the crypto less reliable. It destroys the assumptions that allows that to work. The other thing that works is make things as simple as possible. Now, the whole software industry is working against that. We like to add features and we like to make things do more than they actually need to. But when we have something that we actually need to be secure, having it have as little functionality as possible is one of the very few software engineering techniques that we actually know works, right? That actually measurably improves the reliability and security of systems. And adding backdoors basically takes crypto, which is a simple problem to implement that we kind of get mostly right sometimes, and turns it into a complex problem And when you add that to integrating that into systems as a whole, it basically destroys our ability to make things as simple as possible. So that's one reason from a sort of security of our systems perspective that this is a bad idea. Another problem is that infrastructure itself is important, and to the extent that we want our infrastructure to be reliable, we really don't want to add extra requirements to it that will allow data breaches and so on by hostile intelligence services or by criminals to make things more insecure than they need to be. And so we basically got this problem that we don't know how to build secure software, and the stakes keep going up, and adding these backdoor requirements are just going to be just going to be a terrible mess. But that's all sort of, any of us in this room as technologists who worry about these problems can intuitively understand this in ways that I think we sometimes forget policymakers don't have as easy access to. So one of the things that we need as a community to do is to frequently pull ourselves back a little bit and understand why we believe the things that we believe about how this technology interacts with society and what kinds of harm can be done by making our infrastructure more complex and less secure, and including backdoors and so on, so that we can articulate these things on a policy level with the kind of precision that as scientists and engineers we're able to use as tools. And we often say, well, this is a terrible idea because it's terrible, and of course it's terrible. And we probably need to do a little bit of a better idea there. So I want to talk just for a moment about surveillance and surveillance law in the United States. So almost all of the legal system around surveillance and almost all of the things about which we're going dark are based on rules and policies and so on that date back very much to the analog era. They date back to a technological era, but one in which almost all communication systems were still analog. Endpoints were dumb, and the threat model were things like hidden microphones and so on. So it all dates back to both technically and politically. It dates back to the Nixon administration. So I've got a gratuitous photo of Nixon here. Nixon is the guy on the left. So this is what. That's what the political layer looked like at the time that we were developing our thinking about this. This is what computers looked like at the time. This is a part of a mini computer. So this is a very small computer, or at least part of a small computer. So at this time, this was what cutting-edge, state-of-the-art devices looked like. This is what recording equipment looked like, reel-to-reel mechanical devices. And almost all of our thinking about this, almost all of our policy language dates back to the era when this was the state-of-the-art stuff. And this was, we were just coming to terms with the idea that surveillance is something we might need to be worried about and might need to regulate. Starting in the 1960s and by the early 70s, most but not all of our legal and policy thinking of this was in the form that it currently is in today. So let's fast forward to how this interacts with the digital era. We still think of this as what wiretapping looks like. This is a cover from an IEEE, committing some sort of copyright infringement, come and get me, IEEE security and privacy issue that was about wiretapping, and I had one of the articles in it, so they sent me a copy of the cover art. And the interesting thing about this cover art is this is what they thought wiretapping looks like. There's a van by the side of the road with somebody in a suit with headphones on, listening in to communications going on. And we can tell that This was not an engineer who drew this, because these are power lines, not phone lines. You know, this is our view of this. This is a kind of comforting picture. It suggests retail wiretapping. It suggests that there's somebody who has to do this labor-intensive job of listening to each communication at once. And if you look at wiretapping equipment from not too long ago, you know, you'd hook up this device called a loop extender to a phone line. This is an actual piece of law enforcement wiretapping equipment. And this would be hidden somewhere, maybe in the central office, maybe in some junction box, and connected to a device back at headquarters that would decode the signaling on the line, and if it was a voice wiretap, actuate a digital or analog tape recorder and log the events to a computer. And this is what we think of as wiretapping, and this is how wiretapping was done until very, very recently. This was the dominant retail model for this. Now, the retail model of wiretapping has the advantage of being a problem that we can understand from a technical point of view. We can think of, well, unauthorized, you know, we have Alice and we have Bob, and then we have Eve, the eavesdropper, and, you know, we can think about the capabilities of Eve, the eavesdropper, who's sitting there connected, hopefully not to the power lines, but rather to the phone lines. And, you know, we are terrific at reasoning about this. And, you know, this is from a science point of view and from an academic publishing point of view, just great. We have this beginnings of what looks like a realistic problem, wiretapping, and we get credit as academics for coming up with solutions to the hardest problems that we can solve. And they don't actually have to be the most important problems. What we get credit for solving is the hardest problems. So, you know, I can get to be cryptographer of the month by solving a really hard problem, and it doesn't really matter if no one actually has that problem, as long as it's really hard. And wiretapping has this great advantage that it makes our problems seem like they're not only hard, but important. And one of the ways in which we kind of solve this problem that we've got, or some abstract version of the problem we've got, is this assumption of the retail wiretapping model. That the problem, as we articulate it, is Alice and Bob are communicating with each other over an encrypted, perhaps, channel, and they want to keep Eve, the eavesdropper who has certain capabilities, from being able to recover the content of that communication. And we're encouraged to think this by things like the wiretap report that talks about when the number of wiretaps in which they encountered encryption that prevented them from getting the content that they were looking for. So we've had an enormous amount of very smart talent working on this particular problem and coming up with some amazing stuff. We really know how to do cryptography pretty well. And then there's a very tiny community. Most of the people who are members of that community are in this room at the moment, who are also looking at problems that are surrounding that maybe aren't as easy to actually solve, and that maybe aren't as obviously important problems, like hiding the metadata of the communication. So we've got this very easily abstracted problem that we've spent a lot of attention on, and then this problem that, you know, with all due respect to all of us in this room, is a kind of marginal version of this problem of protecting metadata. And, you know, we're the pioneers in trying to solve that, but we're not taken nearly as seriously, and the problem is not understood to be nearly as well as the content problem. So there's a problem of solving the problems that we can solve versus the problems we actually have. And of course, the problems we actually have are a lot more complicated. So, you know, one is the usability problem. You know, the first First step is to admitting we have a problem. The usability of secure systems, can't really be discussed in polite company. I will say that I did some research a couple of years ago with some grad students in which we looked at the encrypted two-way radios used by the federal government, and we discovered that about a third of the time they can't get the crypto on. And about half of the time in those cases, they don't know that the crypto isn't on. So we've got lots of recordings of inadvertent clear text being sent out. Even the very people complaining about how encryption is causing them to go dark themselves can't get the crypto working, largely because of significant usability problems. Then we have the problem of metadata, and that's the problem that we're solving here, largely in this workshop. Things like Tor, make it difficult to do traffic analysis on a large scale. That's what we aim to do, and we're getting better and better at least getting some handle on this problem. But it's very, very much in its infancy. Now, an interesting thing about the metadata problem is that the legal regime around this is focused very much on content. There are far fewer restrictions in the law about the collection of information about who's communicating that doesn't include the content. Now, that information has another property to it that voice content doesn't have, which is that voice content is inherently, until we develop maybe NSA level speech recognition, voice content is inherently a retail problem. You need somebody to listen to it and make sense of it and analyze it. But information about who's communicating with who is much more amenable to automated analysis, right, to automated analysis tools. And in fact, the more of it you get, the better. More voice just drowns you in more voice, but more metadata about who's communicating becomes more revealing the more there is. Now, we don't have to convince anybody here of that, but the law takes almost exactly the opposite view. It says this is information that gets the least protection, yet this is the information that becomes more and more revealing, perhaps than voice, once some critical mass has been collected. But again, we don't need to be convinced of that, because that's the problem everyone in this room is working on. And there's another problem, which is that because computer security is so terrible, our devices themselves are readily subject to exploitation. Nobody knows how to secure their computer, right? We're all experts on this, and I'm sure that none of us really know how to secure our computers while we make them actually usable. My only defense is I put a little sticker from the EFF on my phone that says come back with a warrant. And as far as I can tell, that's the most effective protection that we have in our against this. We really are dependent on the policy layer here, because technology just doesn't really know how to build computers that can withstand attack. Okay, so let's go back to these two statements. How do we reconcile the wiretap report saying, on the one hand, there's essentially crypto is not a problem for wiretapping, and you have the FBI director saying crypto is the biggest problem in law enforcement. We're going dark. We can't get evidence. How do we reconcile those two things? So what's going on here? So as a science person, one of the things that I like to do is list out what the possibilities are. That's what us science people do. We try to be systematic about this. So I can think of 5 possibilities for reconciling these statements. The FBI is saying, we have this huge problem. The technical community is unwilling to solve it. They won't build encryption with these magic backdoors in it, and if only they would try harder, and we've got a giant problem. And then on the other hand, we have the data saying there doesn't appear to be a giant problem with wiretaps. So one possibility is that law enforcement is lying. For some reason, the head of the FBI has some sort of hidden agenda, and he's saying these things and getting everybody else in the highest level of law enforcement policy to say these untrue things so that he can come in and give us health care or whatever it is the government is really trying to do secretly. And I guess that's possible. Another possibility is that law enforcement is just incompetent, right? The law enforcement community just can't keep up. That law enforcement is not fully understanding these problems, and that these are a bunch of idiots. Now, it's always very comforting to think that the people who are saying things you disagree with are just saying them because they're wrong, or because they don't understand them, because that means all you have to do is explain it to them, and eventually, they'll understand it, or you explain it to the people they work for, and eventually, if you have the right argument, you win. But so far, that hasn't been happening. For 23 years, the technical community has been, saying, explaining why some of the things that law enforcement is claiming don't seem to be right, and there hasn't been a lot of movement on this point. So perhaps the incompetence answer, or the they are wrong answer, might not be right. Now, another possibility is that we're lying or we're incompetent, right? That in fact we do know how to build these backdoors, or if only we were a little bit smarter, we would, and we're holding back. Or that this is a bigger problem and we are in some way hiding it, but that doesn't seem to be true either. So I think there's some possibility that what we're talking about are different things than what they're talking about, and that we get to both be right in some way, and maybe if we can understand what the problem is, we can start to make a little bit of progress on this. So I will make one observation about some of the recent rhetoric. If you look at what the examples that the government uses when they describe going dark, they don't talk about the agent listening in on the phone and hearing static. They don't pull out wiretapping examples. Instead, what they talk about is stored data. They talk about data that's been encrypted, typically on a phone handset, that law enforcement seizes and is unable to decrypt. Now, stored data doesn't get reported in the wiretap report. This is only concerned because of the way the law works. The wiretap reporting, in which those 4 cases of encryption came up, and only 4 cases, was only for communications intercepts. It does not include data that's been seized in other ways, stored data that's been seized. And in fact, this may be an area in which we are starting to make some progress. If you seize a disk drive that's been encrypted, it doesn't matter whether the computer that's been connected to it is insecure if it's not in the picture anymore. If all you have access to is the encrypted data itself, then the security of this depends only on the quality of the encryption. And by all measures, the quality of the current state-of-the-art civilian encryption seems to be pretty good, at least for stored data. We probably are solving that problem. But the debate that we're having is about communications encryption. So one problem is that we don't have anything other than anecdotes from the law enforcement side. And we don't have anything other than suggestions that the tech community, if only we solved it, could solve it if we would just stop holding back. So we're having this very low quality debate about different things. So I think we're at a point in which we're going to have to make some hard choices soon. We're not currently in a situation in which law enforcement is going dark, but I think in some ways they may be going dark in some evidence collection techniques at some point. And we probably need to be prepared to engage in that discussion in a way that goes beyond just yelling. We probably need to be prepared to say, well, how do we actually resolve this on a public policy level and be part of that debate, rather than simply saying, look, the FBI is being stupid here. I don't have any good answers to that question. Right, the current debate is sort of too much fun, and we're all having it right now because we get to be right about the current debate that we're having. Right, there are only 4 wiretaps last year. That doesn't justify some of the things that they're saying, and we can come up with these very good technical arguments for why key escrow solutions are going to be very harmful. And it's always fun to have a debate in which you know that you don't have to compromise because you're completely right. And that's the debate that we're having today. But I think the debate that we're going to be having in some number of not too many years, when we're all still around, might be a little bit harder to have. It might actually involve making some real trade-offs, and I think we need to be prepared to do that. So I'm going to just end with a picture of Nixon, because that's always good to put up. So thanks, and if you want to have any questions or throw anything at me, I'm here.
So welcome to the 3rd session of HotPETS. It's about data privacy. Our first speaker will be Andrew Hiltz, and he'll be speaking about Access My Info, a web application that helps Canadians, and perhaps other people too, to make requests for information from service providers and to find out what information they have. So Andrew's going to speak about his experiences with this, making this thing, and the open problems they have with it. So, Andrew.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Andrew Hiltz. I run a small nonprofit out of Canada called Open Effect, and I'm also a research fellow at the Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto. And so I'll be presenting my work that was co-authored with Dr. Chris Parsons, a postdoctoral fellow at the Citizen Lab. So basically, Access My Info is a privacy-focused technology that played a direct role in a contemporary public policy debate in Canada. So I'll get into a bit about that in a moment. And so first of all, I'll just go over the background of the tool and that debate that was happening in Canada around telecommunications privacy. Then I'll get into the design of the tool itself, the rollout that we had, and the impact that this first release had, and future plans, and then open questions and discussion. So basically, the tool is it's a web application designed to help citizens create legal requests for access to their personal information. So in Canada, we have this consumer privacy law called PIPEDA, and it grants every customer of a business conducting operations in Canada, it grants people the right to request access to the data that that the company is holding on them, and that can just be access to the information itself. You can ask questions about the use of the information, and also request modification of whatever data they're holding on you. Correction rather, to be more specific. And there's similar laws in a few other jurisdictions in the world, but we focused on Canada for a specific reason, and we like to say that this tool helped bring this analog law into the digital world, because we sort of found that companies weren't ready for a digitized version of this law, and essentially we kind of precipitated a form of legal DDoS on Canadian telecommunications companies, which I'll get into a bit later. But essentially it was one method that helped lead to greater transparency in Canada's telecommunications sector. So briefly about the state of telecommunications transparency in Canada in 2014. There's quite a debate around the relationship between telcos and the government. So in Canada, we have, Canadians learned that our Signals Intelligence Agency, CSEC, which is a partner of the NSA in the Five Eyes Alliance, CSEC and various other state agencies were routinely and warrantlessly obtaining access to Canadian telco customers' user data, their call records, etc. So, and there was a sort of general refusal on the side of industry to release information, like in the form of transparency reports that Google, Twitter, and other Silicon Valley and increasingly telcos are publishing. But last year, Canadian telcos had not made any indications that they were willing to divulge this information. And so thanks to Snowden revelations and other sort of FOIA work that the Canadian privacy community have been doing, we learned things like our Border Services Agency had accessed telco customer data almost 19,000 times in 2011, all without a warrant, or 99% of them without a warrant. And another statistic that was thrown about a bit was in that same year, Canadian telcos were asked to disclose subscriber data every 27 seconds. And that's just a request every 27 seconds. We don't know for sure how many user accounts were affected by that request. It could be many, it could be a few. So as a result of this climate of general opacity with regard to telcos, Canadian privacy advocates started pursuing a variety of methods to get more answers. So my colleague Chris Parsons, along with some other privacy advocates, wrote an open letter to the telcos providing like really detailed questions about what sort of data are you collecting? Are you sharing geolocation data with the government? Are you sharing all the records of the websites I visited on my mobile phone? How long are you retaining this data? All sorts of questions, and generally companies didn't respond to this open letter. Another method was working with members of parliament to ask questions of public agencies with regard to how much data they're requesting from telcos. And there were some answers revealed through that, but generally we didn't get that many answers. So another method we decided to try out was this right to information, which I mentioned earlier. So PIPEDA grants Canadians the right to request access to this data from commercial services, specifically, well, no, telecommunications are an example of that. And the law stipulates that companies have 30 days to respond. And within that 30 days, they can respond saying, oh, we need a little more time. So a maximum of 60 days, companies need to respond with your data, answering the questions that you've posed. And access should be free or provided at very little cost. But one of the problems is few Canadians are aware that they have this right, and most probably don't have the wherewithal to go about writing a strongly worded letter that references the right parts of PIPEDA and gives telcos sort of no opportunity to weasel out of responding, which they tried to do anyways. But yeah, so we decided this might be an interesting method to try to get answers for the questions we had about telecommunications disclosures to law enforcement and other state agencies. So to do this, we drafted a right to information request template, which is basically just like that, a legal letter asking pointed questions about the telco company's data practices, what sort of data they're collecting, if they've disclosed it to third parties, et cetera. And that was posted on the Citizen Labs website, and we saw around a few hundred people using the template to file requests. And we know this from some anecdotal reports from a particular telco. So that was more requests than they had ever received. But we decided that maybe we could get more impact. Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. But so here's sort of the basic of what the request letter looked like. So there's just like a basic legal justification at the start saying I'm requesting my data pursuant to this clause in PIPEDA, and then basically it's asking for all records containing personal information. And then we decided to be very specific and ask pointed questions that addressed the relationship with telcos and government, with what sort of data is being collected. So like we didn't know how long or if geolocation data was being retained by telecommunications companies. Like obviously there's the capability due to how cell towers work and the mobile network, how that works, that your location data can easily be collected, or it needs to be collected to really send you data to your device, but we don't know how long it's being stored by these companies. So we're interested in that. So that was the sort of specific record section, and then we asked any extra information, reminded the company of its obligation to respond, and then provided the identifying data of the respondent, or sorry, the requester, to help the company, find them in their records. So we decided that while a letter that someone could copy and paste from a website was a good start, we thought we could have more impact if we made it as easy as possible for citizens to use. So Chris and I decided to build this Access My Info tool, which very much simplified the process. So the general design principles that we had for this tool was make it as zero knowledge as possible, and basically how that worked in practice was it's a client-side web application, so everything is done in the web browser. Once you load the page initially, no user data is sent back to the server. It's all done with a JavaScript framework, and even like PDF rendering is done in the browser. There's some problems with that I'll get to in the future or later on. And so yeah, zero knowledge, and we wanted to respect our users' autonomy. So what basically that came down to was we didn't want this application to automatically send people's requests on their behalf. And that was due to several reasons. The first one being we didn't want these companies to receive a deluge of requests all from the same origin, which could make them easily dismissed as spammy or something like that. And at the end of the day, this is a citizen exercising their own rights, so it should come from them personally. And so we designed the tool to help them create this request, but then it was up to them to actually send it in. And finally, we coded the app to be as extensible as possible to other industries and other legal contexts. So basically that just came down to describing a sort of generic data model with data operators having one or more services. The services are associated with one or more types of data and sort of questions that can be asked about that data. And then services are operating in one or more legal jurisdictions. So, but to start with, we just focused on telco companies operating in Canada. So I'll just give you a run through of what the app looks like and what the user process looks like. So basically, you go on the page, you select the company you're requesting your data from, choose the services. So in our case, like mobility, internet, home phone, fill out your basic contact information, your account number, and then you're done, basically. And so you can either generate a PDF in your browser to download and mail in to your company, or click on the email button and it's sort of a pre-populated mail to link that will open up your default mail client with the request pre-written in there. And so when we finished developing the tool, we launched it in conjunction with Open Media, which is a Canadian advocacy organization focused on digital issues. And they were able to promote it quite heavily. And we saw around 50,000 people had used the tool. And this is just an estimate based on anecdotal evidence because we're not collecting statistics about how many people clicked the generate request button. We don't know for sure, but based on what telco companies have told us, it's around 50,000 people used it last year. And so to see sort of what you get back from this request. So this is what I got back when I requested my data from my mobile company. So I emailed in my request and they sent back a parcel in with a courier service. And generally what it contained is like a cover sheet answering the questions we had about the data, and then sort of just a data dump of, in my case, like customer service log records. So every time I called my cell phone provider to complain about something, you see the record of what you said, and there's also little notes of how the CSR interpreted your complaints, or I don't think anyone calls their cell phone company to say anything positive. So that was just my case specifically, but once we worked with some people who had also, some colleagues who also requested their data from various companies. So we got back a small sample of how different companies responded to the same request. And what we found were companies were quite different in how they responded, particularly around like definitions of basic terms. So we asked, like, do you collect my geolocation information? And one company said, we don't collect your geolocation information. Another company said, we do collect your geolocation information. And what it came down to was the definition between collect and retention. So like the average user might not know the difference and could be confused by the lack of standard definitions. And another thing where companies like varied in how expensive it was to fulfill a request. Some were charging like $1,000 or wanted $1,000. And so the big thing was we didn't learn much about how telcos, whether or not they disclosed data to law enforcement. The answer we got back, and then everyone got back, was pretty much that we can neither confirm nor deny whether your data has been disclosed to law enforcement. So I kind of went over, so basically this was part of a public pressure campaign that eventually led to Canadian telcos releasing transparency reports and aggregate statistics about the disclosure of customer data to government agencies. And numerous complaints were filed with the Privacy Commissioner's Office of Canada. And if you're interested in more information about sort of the policy side of things, you can visit this website operated by my colleague Chris Parsons, telecomtransparency.org. And some of the limitations, it's easy to file a request, but we didn't really give anyone support afterwards. So what happens if the company doesn't respond? What happens if they're trying to charge you an astronomical amount of money? So that was one limitation. The zero knowledge aspect of the system limited reporting. So we didn't know how many people used it, how many companies requests were issued to, and users couldn't really request the template. And so the next steps are just to build out a CMS as a backend to power requests for various different industries, various jurisdictions, and have some sort of reporting back mechanism that's privacy friendly. Yeah, so these are some open questions that we can talk about now. And the code's on GitHub if you're interested in, and yeah, feel free to talk to me on Twitter or email or whatever. Thank you.
Works. Okay, so yeah, I'm Kostas with a weird name, and this joint work with Katusia Palamdes and Marcos Tronati, who talked yesterday. Websites ask for information, right, all the time. So you go to the website of KLM, and then right away it asks you to enter your country, right? And you cannot even continue before entering your country. So this sucks. So right, you have to go there and search for your country, and then Greece is never there. You always need to go to the other countries, find the combo. It really sucks. So it wouldn't be great if there was an API that the browser would use to allow the website to ask some information about you, right? So like, could say, we'd like to share your passport details, medical records, and full genome information with KLM, and from that, obviously KLM can, find out my country and all this. So that's great, right? No, so, okay, I'm not proposing this, and even if I would, I wouldn't come to PETS to present it. So, but the point I'm trying to make is that why is this, so this makes you laugh, and this, which is not fiction anymore, it's reality, is so widespread and normal, right? So you go to weather.com from a mobile, and right away it tells you, would you like to share your location with weather.com? Right? And then I would really like to press this share button, right? Because entering my location manually sucks. This is great. But then if I do, then weather.com will know my exact GPS address. Okay? And this is like way too much information and completely disproportional to what weather.com actually needs. So, yeah, so there's this issue here. So why is this happening? What can we do? And of course, not just for weather. There's a whole bunch of so-called location-based services, super cool stuff that every teenager does, like Foursquare and all that ask you for your location, right? And people use it. So yeah, you have the possibility of not using it, but in reality, people use it. So what can we do to protect the user's location? So this is what we try to do here: protect user's location from the service provider. So we've been doing some work along these lines, and then one quite common way of doing this is obfuscation. So this is my area location here, this blue dot. And instead of reporting this to the provider, I'm going to just add some noise. I'm going to produce this red dot, and I'm going to report this to the provider. So a couple of years ago, we proposed, so there are various ways of doing this obfuscation. We proposed a way that's based on this planar Laplace distribution from the difference of privacy kind of world. And yeah, and this, then you can show that this satisfies some good formal guarantees of location. So namely, if two locations are quite close to each other, then by seeing this red dot, the provider cannot distinguish them. While if two locations are far away from each other, then the provider might be able to distinguish them to give you back the service that you want. So all this is nice, and we have the line of work about this. It started in PETS 2 years ago and ended in PETS 1 day ago. So Marco gave a talk. So lots of nice stuff, so I invite you to read it, but I'm not going to talk about this at all today. So what I'm going to talk about is something I was quite excited about, but I have never talked about in any conference, any let's say, more scientific approach of like research approach to this, which is a tool. So at some point I said, okay, all this theory is nice, but what can you do to actually solve the problem that I want to press the share button on weather.com without revealing my GPS coordinates? So what were my goals? I said, okay, I'm going to try to hack something. So what are my goals? I want to provide a simple and practical solution, right? And simple enough so that common people actually use it. So my goal was not to create a prototype and then pay 10 students to use it for 3 months and then publish something and then forget about it. So I wanted to go to completely common people that, and see whether they're willing to use something like that. And to do so, I want to create something that's understandable and configurable by human beings. And I like something also that's application agnostic. I don't want to go to every single web application and modify it, of course, right? So I want something at the browser or operating system level. So going back to weather.com, so how can weather.com find my address? It uses this geolocation API that looks like this. It's quite simple. It's just one JavaScript call. When the web page makes this call, the browser asks you for your consent. If you press share, it detects using various ways, either GPS or Wi-Fi list or whatever, your location, gives it back to the page, all right? So location, what it does, it's quite simple. So it's going to intercept. So it's an extension, a browser extension, so runs in the background. It's going to intercept this JavaScript call. And it does that, so there's this content script technically that runs in the background, and this content script can inject code in the page. So we inject this tiny bit of code on every web page that's going to go and replace the function that the function of the API with our function. So we're going to intercept this, add noise, and give back a noisy answer to the website. And all this is completely transparent to the user. So an important point that we're trying to do is try to create an interface that is as simple as possible for just like normal users to use. We want absolute simplicity. So here's how it works. I have a normal browser here, nothing weird is going on, and I'm going to this web page that uses the geolocation API. So wait a second. So these demos never work because you have forgotten something. All right, here it is. So when I went to this web page, two things happened. So the normal message that normally appears when you use a geolocation API appeared. And at the same time, this button that was not here before, this button appeared when the geolocation API was called, appeared, all right? And a user might actually completely ignore this button. Okay, it's a bit weird that it appeared, and go on with his life as usual. So I pressed the share button, and then my location was revealed to this website that just displayed it on a map. And if you look, you will see that it's not the exact location. So without if you try it on your laptop, without the plugin, the detection is pretty accurate. So from the point of view of the user, this is quite simple, so nothing too much. Then, of course, if you're a more advanced user and you're trying to figure out what's happening, you might click on this button and say, okay, what's going on? So I'm going to be notified that there is some privacy level that is set to medium, so whatever this means. And then I can change it, so I can set the level for this specific website. So I might say, okay, wait a second, so this HTML demos. Okay, it's not that. I mean, it doesn't need my exact location. So let's set this to high. So if I do the same thing, then again, it gets a location, but it's more noisy. All right. Or if I dig a bit deeper, I can say, okay, this is use fixed location. So maybe I don't care at all about using my real location, because this is like a completely website I don't care about. So I'm set to use fixed location. I refresh, and now the website thinks that I'm in an island in the Pacific. So, and then if I try to dig in more, then there's this options page. So I might want to check what this is. And then, so there are several configurations. In particular, you can go to these privacy levels. And there are these privacy levels that I was seeing before, low, medium, and high. And then each one of them is configurable. So I can actually change this slider. And then visually, the plugin will show me what kind of accuracy I will be getting with this setting, and what kind of privacy in a sort of graphical way. So yeah, that's it more or less. So we spent some time trying to make the interface as intuitive as possible. So we also have mobile support. Again, that was hard, so we wanted to put all the functionality in a mobile, because this is actually where it's more useful, right? This GPS-enabled devices, they use geolocation all the time. All right, so this is the timeline. We started this at the end of 2013. We have a first version for Chrome that's more easy to code for. Then next year, we had Firefox version. This year, we implemented for mobile, and we also have an Opera version. And so far, adoption was quite positive. So I was quite happy. We have a bit more than 40,000 active users, mostly in Firefox and Chrome. So Chrome and Firefox report active users, so users that install the plugin and keep using it without uninstalling it. So that was good. So how do users discover the extension? So we didn't advertise at all. We didn't spend a single dollar on this. We had some press articles, which were nice. So some people that don't know blogs and news websites wrote about us. So some traffic came from there. So Google and Mozilla, so we have, of course, this extension is listed in the stores, and occasionally you get some promotion from them, so they have some algorithms, and sometimes they decide to give you traffic. And a lot of users come from just searching, which was quite nice that we saw this, because it means that users actually care about privacy. So if you search the Firefox web store for location, just location, we come in first position, which is great. And searching just for privacy, we came quite high, which is quite impressive, because there's a lot of, there are more than 1,000 extensions just in the privacy category alone in Firefox. So small trivia for the end of the talk. Try to guess how many extensions are in Chrome's privacy category. All right, so we had some press coverage, so I was happy about. So this is a technological news website, and so it was nice because we were quite happy that it was, so the end result was simple enough so that a website for the general audience could write an article about it and explain to the users what it is and what they can do about it. It was great. So more positive press, or maybe positive, I actually don't know, but hopefully it's good. And the most important thing was, so this month, last month, we were selected as the pick of the month. So Mozilla every month selects an extension, and they ask you to propose extensions to be selected like candidates. So we proposed one, and it was picked. So it was great, because immediately it boosted traffic quite a lot. So it was, again, nice because, like Mozilla liked it, and we're happy about it. So in Chrome, also we're happy that growth is quite linear. So there are people installing it, and they don't seem to uninstall it. So which is nice. So it keeps growing. Then we can look at reviews, which is quite interesting. So this guy here says that he likes the idea of having a fixed location instead of just adding noise to the real location, which was quite interesting. There were a few users saying that, and I was surprised because having a fixed location has zero utility, and still some users like it because it's simple, it's intuitive, and why not? It's understandable. So sometimes just the simplest thing, users like it. Some other users, they're easily puzzled. So this guy says that I installed it and nothing happened. So yeah, it's true. It's hard to. Yeah, interfaces are hard. So we added a demo page so that people can. Yeah. Again, if you target end users, then you need to deal with issues like that. Then other people also are confused. So it doesn't work because weather.com still finds my zip code. Of course, this happened because of the IP address, which has nothing to do with the geolocation API. But still, so explaining these things to users, it's tricky. Then there are the crazy people, a very awesome idea. You guys rock. OK, thanks. All right. So when I first coded the extension, as a fixed location, as a default fixed location, I put an NSA billing. I thought it's funny. Then some people don't think it's funny, so and I sympathize. So I changed it to the Mandra Island in the Pacific. So I chose this island because it's completely inhabited. So there's not a single guy who might, coincidentally. That was good. Then, this guy says can't do anything against Google's geotargeting, which is kind of true and sad. At the same time, he puts 4 stars. So maybe he's still happy that, OK, you can't do anything against Google, but you can do something against weather.com. Weather.com is not Google, so why should I give my GPS to location to weather.com? Anyway, so futures direction. So far we're happy. What can we do? Well, first, it's a great tool for trying new stuff, like the latest, coolest Marcos techniques from yesterday. We can try to adapt it, and of course it's challenging because you need to do it on an extension, and it's not easy. So something we don't do so far. So far, we are very paranoid about collecting data. We don't collect anything. We don't do any communication whatsoever, nothing. So we really want users to trust it and use it. But still, it would be quite useful to try to collect some data and see. So for instance, we could do this locally. So we could collect data locally on the extension, with the user's consent, of course, and then run some attacks experiments or whatever, again locally, which it's useful for 2 reasons. So first, you can show this to users so that the user can visualize his data, see some attacks, and try to educate him about what he's actually disclosing to the websites. And of course, you could also collect the results of the analysis, so not the data of the user, in some private way. So of course, this is tricky, which is interesting for research. That's another direction. Then more platforms, Android, if we can make it, would be great. Then some people from Microsoft Research said that they're interested in doing it for the new browser of Microsoft, which is also nice. And that's basically it. I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, so second talk of this session, between you and the ice cream, will be given by Ewa Sita from Yale University, and she will be talking about how to build trustworthy collective certification authorities.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Eva, and this is a joint work with Julia Thomas, Dylan Fisher, David Polinsky, and my advisor, Brian Ford. So our online infrastructure often depends on authorities to provide simple yet security-critical services. And those authorities include logging, timestamping, naming, randomness, digital notaries, but probably most importantly, certificate authorities that attest to the fact that a holder of a public key legitimately corresponds to a name such as google.com. However, how trustworthy are those authorities that we rely on to achieve security of connections on the internet? Let's have a look. Thanks to EFF's SSL Observatory project, we know that there are over 600 CAs trusted either directly or indirectly by Mozilla and Microsoft. And in this picture, you can see how complex that system is. Well, in principle, any of those CAs can issue certificates for any domain. And because those CAs hold this great power, they're a prime key target of attackers that want the ability to perform man-in-the-middle attacks. And unfortunately, we know that breaches have happened. DigiNotar, Comodo, and quite recently, CNN IC, to name just a few. So let me show you what truly happens when CA goes malicious or is compromised. Well, such a CA can issue a fake certificate, again, google.com. Then an attacker takes that certificate, gives it to a client, and the client is led to believe that he's talking to the real Google server. That's not great. So the big problem here is that if we trust many CAs, the attacker gets to choose which one to attack. And this results in the weakest link security overall because it takes only one malicious, compromise, or simply incompetent CA to threaten the security of all of us on the internet. This is not a new problem, and current defenses include oversight from industry organizations, browser and OS vendors, pinning of certificates and CAs for different domains, and logging and monitoring. In this talk, I'll focus on certificate transparency and all the deployed system that has Google behind it, as well as critical mass from IETF. The main idea behind certificate transparency is to make it possible to publicly log all newly generated certificates so that a larger body of monitors and auditors can verify them. In principle, once a certificate is logged, anyone can look at it and raise an alarm if it's suspicious, for example, issued by unusual CA or containing unusual permissions. So what certificate transparency allows you to do is to answer a question: does this certificate belong to Google? Let's go back to our scenario where our malicious CA issued a birth certificate, and that certificate was delivered to a client. Now the client checks the certificate against certificate transparency and clearly rejects it because it's fake. So that's great. Certificate transparency allows the clients to decide which certificates to trust. Unfortunately, it has 3 weaknesses. The first weakness, privacy. Each time a client checks on a certificate, he unfortunately broadcasts his browsing history. And even if the client chooses a trusted server to talk to, we're back to square one where we have a single authority that we trust. There are some ways to mitigate this problem, however, they don't fundamentally solve it. The second weakness, retroactive security. It takes time to log, detect, and revoke bad certificate. If our client's request falls within that window of vulnerability, he unfortunately gets pawned again. And notice, certificate transparency does not prevent bad certificates from being logged. It only ensures that those certificates will finally be found and recovered. The third weakness, blocking. I would like you to meet Dave, the dictator, who has the ability to block our client's request to certificate transparency, forcing the client to either forego the checking and get pawned or not use the resource at all. And I will let you decide which one would happen in practice. So what we need is a different approach. We need to prevent those bad certificates from being logged and signed in the first place. What if the entire body of 600-something CAs and maybe log servers, monitors, and auditors could watch over all the certificates before they get signed? So what we really need is collective validation or sign-off. And we can achieve that using a collective authority that we call authority. It's basically a set of participants working together to act as one. And let me tell you more about certificate authorities. The main idea is to have many parties collectively sign certificates and not only have a single CA to do so. In this setup, all participating CAs get to propose certificates, and everyone who participates gets to verify them. We envision having hundreds or even thousands of diverse participants, and we want to make it easy to join. The more people looking over the certificates, the better for us. So what a certificate authority would produce is a single collective signature. However, that signature would embody a much wider trust of the entire authority and not a single CA. And a CA gets to block a signature if they find a suspicious certificate. The clients enjoy simple validation as if they're a single CA because of the collective signature, and the process is secure unless a large fraction of participants is compromised. So you may ask why we need a certificate authority, and the answer is simple. We want to go from this model, weakest link security, to this model, strongest link security. And let me tell you how we can do that using scalable collective Schnorr log signing. The basic primitive of a authority is collectively signed tamper-evident log. A authority consists of a leader that gets to propose new records to include, and a large body of follower servers that collectively witness, verify, and participate in producing that signature. Again, the leader is only trusted with availability. He doesn't have the ability to produce valid certificates on his own. Every entry has to be collectively validated and endorsed by the entire authority. And we do that using COSI, Scalable Collective Signing Protocol. COSI builds upon well-understood and existing primitives, namely Merkle trees, Schnorr signature, and multi-signatures. However, what COSI makes possible is to scale those multi-signatures to even thousands of nodes. And we do so using communication trees and aggregation, as in scalable multicast protocols. Very quickly, Merkle trees basically allow you to cryptographically summarize items and then efficiently validate that items in question were indeed included in the tree. Schnorr signature, a well-known discrete log scheme that follows Fiat-Shamir proof identity that is made non-interactive by using a hash function. It follows a simple three-step process: commitment, challenge, and response. And a signature on message M is a part of two elements: challenge and response. Verification is quite easy, follows a similar three-step process. However, I mentioned that we want collective signing. If you have n signers, you will have n signatures and n verification. This is going to get costly very fast. For this reason, a better approach is to have a multi-signature, a signature that is produced by many cooperating signers. Schnorr multi-signature extends the scheme that I just told you about in a way that allows every signer to retain their own public and private key, which is quite important. In this scenario, each signer creates a commitment. Those commitments are aggregated into a collective commitment to produce a collective challenge, to which every participant responds individually using their own private key. And then the response is aggregated into a collective response. So what's a collective signature on message M is, again, just a pair of two elements: the collective challenge and the collective response. Verification, again, super simple, except for the fact that we're using a collective key, which is a product of all participants' public keys. Other than that, we have same verification done exactly once. That's great. That's exactly what we want for our clients. Here we have the COSI protocol, which consists of 4 phases, 2 round trips on a communication tree, during which the servers incrementally generate the signature in a way that limits every participating server's computation and communication cost to the number of immediate children. There is a small caveat, however. I have completely looked over the availability problem. We're talking about hundreds or thousands of servers, and some servers will fail. We have to handle those failures unless we want to open ourselves up to DOS attacks. We have 2 approaches to do that. The first approach, exception, we leverage the properties of Schnorr signatures such that if a node fails, the remaining nodes can still produce a valid signature, however, under a modified collective key. Simply that key does not reflect a contribution of the node that failed during the signing process. So what the client gets is a signature under that modified collective key, along with an explanation what happened. The client will only accept the signature if a proper quorum of nodes is maintained. The second approach, life insurance policy, uses verifiable secret sharing to allow clients to insure their private keys with other signers that we call insurers. If a node fails, the insurers get together, recover the failed node's ephemeral signing key, and continue as if no failure happened. Next, our prototype and preliminary results. We have implemented a timestamping authority in Go using our DD's crypto library. We use Schnorr multi-signatures on EG255-19 curve, and we run some experiments on the TerLab. Our preliminary results are quite encouraging. The average signing latency for an authority of 4,000 nodes, over 4,000 nodes, is around 1.5 seconds, with the maximum latency being well under 3 seconds. Again, this is just a prototype. We did not optimize it. We just wanted to ballpark what numbers we're working with, and we believe that these results are quite encouraging. Well, so far so good. However, how do we go about deploying a certificate authority? Let's have a look. In the ideal world, we would have this humongous certificate authority federating current CAs and OS and browser vendors, and perhaps maybe nonprofits. However, it would take a major effort to make that happen. Every browser would have to embed a authority key. Browser would have to be upgraded for Schnorr verification, and probably most importantly, would have to get CAs to participate and accept some trade-offs. For this reason, we have 3 incremental deployment scenarios. In addition to the ideal case I just told you about, we can have a browser-driven certificate authority. In this case, a browser vendor, for example, Mozilla, acts as an authority leader and requests and finally forces CAs to participate if they want to be included in the browser's root store. The second deployment, root CA-centric authority. For example, VeriSign can act as a authority leader and request its own intermediate CAs to participate if they want to retain their signing power. Lastly, the backwards compatible solution, log server-driven certificate authority. We can basically leverage the existing certificate transparency infrastructure and collectively endorsed signed certificate timestamps. In this case, the log server will be the leader, and the monitors and auditors would act as signers. And this approach leverages the existing infrastructure, however, solves the 3 issues I told you about before. To conclude, we can and should build a better CA system. We can do that. We can build a proactively secure system such that no bad certificates are ever endorsed. We can build a privacy-friendly one where users don't have to gossip their browsing history. And we can do that using authorities and Cozy, one of the ways to implement the idea I told you about. However, it will definitely take time and effort to make that happen, both from the industry and the research organizations. There are a lot of questions that we have to answer, for example, including, certificate revocation, another big problem. However, I believe it's really important to take on that challenge and finally provide a solid foundation for our PKI system. Our privacy, security, and often safety critically depends on it. Thank you.
Okay, so welcome to the last HotPETS session of the day. We're going to try to go out with a bang, so I'm hoping everyone is all rushed on sugar and ready to engage and ask lots of great questions and engage in discussion. So the topic of this session is privacy and human behavior, and the first talk is by Amy Elliott and Scout Sinclair Brody, and they're going to be talking about human-centered design for secure communications, opportunities to close the participation gap.
All right, thank you all. I'm Scout, the shorter one. That's Amy, our design director. Thank you for coming, and hopefully you will be able to tear yourself away from your sugar-induced haze to listen to what we have to say and ask us some interesting questions or tell us some interesting things at the end. So we are, as the title suggests, looking at ways of broadening participation in the usable security ecosystem. And the work we're going to talk about today is very much a work in progress, so we're very eager to hear what you have to say about it. You can get in touch with us here at the conference. We have, an email that you can send us information at. We have a blog, newsletter, both of which you can subscribe to. We also have a Slack channel. If you're into that, we'd love to have you join us there. Okay, so people, I come from the security community. I did my PhD in usable security, so I'm used to coming to conferences like this. But someone like Amy with a background in human-centered design, when she talks about the work she does, people are like, oh, secure communication, and she's in the Bay Area. She's like, that's a Bitcoin startup, right? And so it's very, sort of challenging to try and talk to folks when you have such a different background. Folks in this room, maybe there are a couple of you who can read this, but there are actually 56 million people on Earth who speak Thai, and with a 97% literacy rate, that's about 52 million people who know that says the Thailand Hotel Company. But if you don't speak the language, if you aren't fluent in the sort of the vocabulary or the symbols of a particular organization or community, it's very challenging to participate in it. And that's where Simply Secure comes in. We are dedicated to improving the usability of open source security tools and normalizing design as part of the open source development process, which is a tall order. We are looking to achieve this through direct collaboration with tool makers, through community building, connecting people from different communities as well as within the community, and providing a resource hub of tools and techniques that people can use to do their own work in this space. We are an aspiring nonprofit. Right now it consists of me, Amy, and Trouble, our operations manager. Amy will now tell you a bit about some work that she's been doing to get familiar with this space. We call this a listening tour, and we'll let her give you more details.
Great. Thanks, Scout. So, human-centered design. I'm not sure, who here has heard that term before, familiar with it? Decent number of hands. That's extremely exciting to me. So the listening tour is a human-centered design activity. And one way to think about this is we've heard a bit about usability in user research earlier today with end users of technology. Simply Secure as a service organization focused on secure communications that are open source efforts. People like you all are the users or consumers or constituents of Simply Secure in some way. So the listening tour is user research with a set of people who we believe could be part of the Simply Secure ecosystem. There were 3 core activities of this listening tour. The heart of it, or the meat of it, were these one-on-one interviews with thought leaders in this space. So that includes scholars, activists, people on the hardcore crypto side, people on the legal side, engineers, researchers, really just trying to take a temperature of the space, semi-structured, covering a range of topics from history to priorities and visions for the future. We also hosted a salon. This salon included a semi-structured group interview with 7 people covering much of the same topics as the individual 1-hour sessions. And I had 9 in-situ conversations at conferences. And a key thing I want to flag is these conferences and events shown here are different than this event in that they were oriented towards designers or entrepreneurs. And I think that's an important thing for thinking about how to bridge that participation gap and bring in some new voices. Because these were people that had not opted in or self-identified as privacy aware or concerned or interested in security. So it's true that I went to an event in the Bay Area around providing UX mentorship to startups. And they believed to a person that secure communication was anti-doxing strategies, that was just what they understood that to mean. So interesting data point. Anyway, what I'm going to do now is share a few representative quotes to give a flavor of the texture of the conversations. And my assumption is people in this community and as leaders in this community that these are going to feel familiar in some ways. And that familiarity is a good thing. That would be kind of an indicator that this conversation is channeling some of the thoughts and energy that you've expressed either tacitly or explicitly. So there was a bit of kind of just resignation around we just have to deal with tools that may not be optimal and we can't complain. We're not allowed to complain. And there's a lot on at stake in the work of secure communications, people's lives, livelihoods, well-being, families, literally on the line here. And there's a sense that it's urgent, that it matters, and we all just have to roll up our sleeves and soldier on. So that came through here really clearly. Being smart and solving problems. This is in some ways really similar to some of the exciting things that Matt Blaze shared earlier today around problems we can solve and problems we have. So that same kind of sentiment also came through here around engineers being good at solving problems, but looking for guidance around what people need. And I think that that's interesting. The answers that we heard to questions like, what's missing? What do we need more of? It wasn't more policy work or more kind of technical elegance, although I certainly believe that there are places for these things. There was a sense that there was a benefit in getting more research done and better understandings of user needs. And design research are one mechanism for bridging that gap and understanding those end user needs. So quotes like this make my heart sing. I used to say users were not my problem, but actually all the problems are user problems in some way. And I think that the intention behind this quote is things may be possible mathematically, things may be possible cryptographically, they may be possible in a laboratory condition, but in the real world, things start to break down. And if you actually want to have these secure systems in use in real life conditions, there's a need to understand end user needs. And I'd also like to flag that there's a bit of a blind spot around corporate IT and the kind of a dismissive quality of there's no point to delivering tools. So I've noticed as someone that comes as a user experience designer with a background in human-computer interaction, but outside the kind of traditional stronghold of cryptography or even CS and usable security, I've noticed that this is a community that likes sweeping judgment. So these pronouncements like there is no point, often accompanied with a hand gesture, is definitely something that I've noticed and I'm beginning to appreciate. So I think that the skepticism or even hostility to corporate IT is interesting because it exposes an area of opportunity and one kind of potential vector, a thing that we could start to push on a little more to get more people globally using secure communication tools. So this is work in progress. We are looking for ways to continue to shape this conversation. Like Scout mentioned, feel free to email us and at our contact address, or you can email Slack at simplysecure.org. We can add you to a channel. That's another place that this conversation is being shaped. But what I'm going to do right now is share a few of the key themes that are emerging. So theme one is snake oil. Just the phrase snake oil feels really evocative to me. It sounds like some kind of weird carnival, like 100 years ago or something. And these apothecary bottles were trying to cover that. And I think that it's really interesting to note that as part of these interviews, I had asked people around successes in the secure communication space. In general, it was difficult for people to go on and on about successes. Despite a professional reticence around naming and shaming, it was much easier for people to talk about what was broken and what was bad. And I think that the challenge there is that there just aren't a ton of examples of security feeling good. And I think feeling good is important. I wholeheartedly support usability, but I would love for us as a community to try to reach higher than usable and into delightful, into systems that are pleasurable, that people are actually really excited about spending their time in. Okay, so a whole chain of things that are not equal to each other. Usability is not the same as user experience. User experience is not the same as visual interface design. These are different terms, and there's a big opportunity for some vocabulary, even some basics like a glossary, which is one of the things that we at Simply Secure have discussed about putting together as a potential resource that we could share with the community. There is big confusion about what design is, what it is that designers do. And I'm personally pretty excited and inspired to come up with ways of clarifying that and making it possible for open source teams to work with user experience designers to bring a little bit of design and a little bit of usability into some of these projects. And finally, there's a difference between the lab and real world. So usability, the kind of baseline association or assumption that we're starting to hear over the course of these conversations was something that felt a little more anchored in the lab And it's absolutely possible to think about usability while in the field, and there is a whole host of techniques and methods for eliciting user responses and understanding real life behavior and the attitudes behind it. And I think that I'm passionately motivated to get everyone using secure communications. And everyone means everyone, even people who aren't security aware, even people who aren't explicitly opting in or concerned about privacy, everyone. And I think in order to do that, there's a lot of things that we can leverage of best practices around user experience design for other kinds of products and apps, and think about some ways to weave in a bit of that thinking. So to go back to Thailand, the land of the sign that Scout shared, I think things like that are a really interesting analogy when we think about, the cryptography community or the security community. It can be a really big community, but much like Thailand and the Thai language, despite that robust tourism industry and a lot of people going through the Thai hotels, not a lot of people are coming away with any bits of that Thai. It still feels really, really kind of high barrier to participation. I think that similarly, there's an inner circle of people who are potentially security adjacent, and they're still kind of having trouble, I think, of coming in and taking bits of that community and bringing it back, back out to them. But in Thailand today, and when we look at the internet, there's a lot of people that are running kind of informal businesses, like you just lay out a blanket and sell like bracelets or whatever on this blanket. It's increasingly normal in Thailand to do that via Facebook. Like you need a Facebook presence to be a blanket vendor in some contexts in Thailand. That's just how life is now. So despite, we can have our own opinions about Facebook as a company or Facebook as an experience, they've been extremely successful at getting people to depend on their tool and their platform, even if they have low literacy, even if they're not familiar with the Roman alphabet. The barrier to participation there is quite low, and I think that there are potentially some analogies that we can think about for improving our tools. This other emerging theme, the adorable fluffy lapdog on a leash. So there's a missed opportunity around corporate IT, which is seen as sort of cuter or fluffier or something than I don't know what would be the more like hardcore security dog, like a pit bull or a mutt or something. I'm not sure, but there's a bit of a missed opportunity there, and I think that because this community has done a really interesting job of reaching out to journalists. I've been excited and inspired to learn about some of the great work that you here in this room are doing this, or librarians. There's a lot of stuff out there, and I think that the hearts and souls of this community, in some cases, it can be an easier fit to activism and individual actors, as opposed to the many people who are having some bits of their even personal device decisions made by a corporate entity. So the Gartner Group, they're a big kind of industry forecasting group. They're estimating that by 2017, half of employers are going to require people to use their own devices for work purposes. And I don't know what that means, but that's a bold statement, and it's pretty different than the world of a couple of years ago. And I think that there's a lot of potential change and potential risk around having a class of people that in some cases are the most highly compensated and the most powerful, outsourcing a bit of their decision making to some kind of corporate entity. And what that means for patterns of learned helplessness, what that means for patterns of agency, and what it is that we as a community can do in order to encourage people to think about their own personal choices and secure communications. So in the interest of time, and because this is emerging work, I'll pause there with those themes and just kind of leave this up as some other bits of things that we're starting to hear, and say that during our question time, we're interested to hear from you how these are feeling. If they feel self-evident, tell us. If they feel completely false, that's also interesting, because one of the things we're trying to do is bring this all together into a group, secure communications, open source. Okay, so I'm gonna just conclude. I know I said I was concluding, but I'm really concluding now. What are these opportunities to close the participation gap? What is it that we need to do in order to get more voices into this room? I've been impressed by the welcome that I've gotten as a first-time HotPETS attendee and presenter. Let's think about ways in which we can close this gap. So motivating lay user adoption, super important. And I think one of the challenges here is, again, to name check Matt Blaze and the like hardware encryption, you don't want to have a one telephone problem. Like you can only communicate to someone else. And that means that an individual user needs to be an evangelist, because we're basically saying that if we want an individual person to say, hey, friends in whatever, SMS, I want us to move our communication into some other platform, they need a reason why to tell their friends. And right now it's really, really hard to do that if you aren't a technical person. So if you want to get into public key cryptography, then great. There's a ton of really compelling reasons why there's alternatives to SMS. But if you're not that person, it's a lot harder to come up with any plausible reason why the people that you're texting with should move to this other thing. So finally, creating a shared vocabulary, and I've alluded to, there are many different kinds of design. User experience design can be about the flow of things. It's not just necessarily that kind of optional or window dressing visual design at the end. It's about the end-to-end experience. And just as many designers don't speak crypto, many cryptographers don't speak design. So I think that increasing literacy can start to change or impact the ways in which tools are developed, and there's an interesting opportunity there. So finally, listening tour, ongoing activity. We're connecting with a whole community of people from diverse backgrounds. We have a blog, we have a newsletter. That's us. Thank you. And I just want to give a brief kind of credit to the photographers who supplied some of this beautiful imagery. And I'll let you wrap that up, Scout.
That's it. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up here pretty quickly. And one tradition that HotPETS has had for the last couple of years is voting on your favorite talk or talks. So Mike's going to talk about the process this year. Oh, it's not working.
Yeah, here. All right, I'll announce it while you maybe get it working, because it's pretty easy.
Okay.
Oh, it's just not plugged in there. There we go. It'll get there. We shouldn't have technical problems at the very last point in the conference. Okay, so while we're figuring this out, if you go up there and hit the input button until computer 1, it should work. While we're figuring this out, we started a best talk, best presentation at the HotPETS Award a few years ago. We're going to continue that today. While I explain this, you can all go to bit.ly/HotPETS 2015. It's very simple, bit.ly/HotPETS 2015. You can vote on your first choice and second choice for best talk, favorite presentation, however you want to kind of construe it. A few things. Number one, you can vote for your own talk. You're completely allowed to. Number two, please don't vote more than once. You are technically able to. We just don't want you to. So we're going to trust you to not do that. And yeah, please vote however you want. The first place will be 5 points. The second place will be 3 points. And then I'm going to tally up the totals. And the winner's going to get this exciting little Drexel prize pack with a laser engraved pen and a little magnet banner and this cool mug. So you can remember your time at Drexel for forever. I'll turn it back over. Okay, great. But that's the link.
I was given the helpful link to submit another response.
Oh, yeah, can you vote for the same talk twice? Sure. The question was, can you vote for the same paper twice on the first and second choice? Sure. Why not? Go for it.
Okay, so while the votes come in, I'm going to give some closing remarks. First, I'd like to talk about the future of HotPETS. We made some changes this year, and I'd like to think about how we can make it better. So as I do that, I will discuss the things that we made, the changes that we made, and hopefully get some feedback from you in the remaining days here and also over email and in the future. Okay, one of the changes that we made this year was to go from 6-page proposals to 2-page proposals. The idea was to make it easier to submit and to hopefully get a more diverse group and also encourage work that was less mature and was more novel or hotter. If that's a good idea, maybe we should continue it. Another change that we made this year was we abolished a PC, and it was ruled by the three of us, the three co-chairs. It's a possibility to have maybe perhaps better reviewing, more informed reviewing if we brought back the PC, or maybe we could go to dictator rule. So this is a change that we are considering. So a goal of HotPETS this year was to encourage people outside the core pets community that's existed in the past to try to get a more diverse group. So here's some numbers from all of our submissions. I counted all the authors and all of the individual submissions. I divided a submission by the number of authors. That's why you have fractional submissions, just to see how much we succeeded. As expected, we got a lot of submissions from academics. We appreciated and we loved, and they were great. I was encouraged to see we drew from some other communities as well, including in particular activist nonprofits and also hacker, developer, software engineers. So that was encouraging to see, and I hope we're able to improve the diversity and grow this in the future. And please send me, all of us, your feedback or thoughts for how we can improve HotPETS in the future. Okay, so before we leave HotPETS 2015, there are some additional thanks. I know this is the third time thanks have been given, but this hasn't been mentioned so far. First, I just want to give a special thanks to our keynote speaker. We unfortunately didn't give him a lot of time, but he was great. He graciously accepted to come and really delivered, and I was just thrilled by his talk. So thanks a lot for that, Matt. And thanks, Paul Syverson, for suggesting Matt and connecting us. That was appreciated as well. Also, I'd just like to thank all the submitters, not just the speakers, thanks to them, of course, but everybody who took the time to submit. We read every one of the proposals and discussed them carefully, and we really appreciate anybody who submitted. Also, I'd just like to mention, because we have recording this year for the first time, I'd like to thank everybody who made that possible, including Rachel, Drexel, and the support staff. We had some demands for IP and privacy reasons that were maybe unusual, and we were accommodated, and I really appreciate that. Finally, I'd like to thank the departing chairs, Kelly Kane and Michael Brennan, who won't be back next year. I will be back next year. They were an absolute pleasure to work with. I couldn't have done it without them, and we appreciated everything that they've done to make this a success. So thanks to all these people, special thanks to all of them. And I'd also like to announce the incoming chairs, or rather incoming chair. Sadia Afroz will be joining us next year as a HotPETS co-chair. And there will be a third, yes. And there will be a third co-chair, not yet decided on, except it will be a non-US person. That is the requirement and probably the reason it hasn't been decided on yet. Okay, so also Rachel asked me to give you some details of the hike before we all disperse, if you are going on the hike. The arrival times are on the website, but the times we return are not, so that I'd like to highlight here. So food and water arrives at 11:30, the bus will arrive at 11:45. That's the address, 33rd and Arch, it's near the dorms if you know where that is. That address is online, so you don't need to record it right now if you don't want to. Note that the buses are leaving at noon, so arrive before noon so you can get on the bus. It'll take about a half an hour to get there. And then for your travel plans back, we will depart the park at 4 o'clock, which means that we won't be able to go the entire length of any one of their routes, so we'll have to turn around at some point to get back by 4. And then we should be back here back to where the buses picked you up between 4:30 and 5. So if you're traveling back, you can be assured that you'll be back by 5, and you'll probably be back a half an hour earlier than that. And just in case you're wondering what this all is going to involve, it's a beautiful park in the middle of the city, although it's in a valley apparently, so you can't tell. And there are several trails that you can choose from. We expect that people will go off in their own groups, and there are different levels of difficulty, so you can decide what you want to do. Okay, are we ready with the votes? Okay, so Mike, take it away.
Cool. So so first of all, again, I just want to echo everything Aaron said. Thank you all. It was really fun doing this, and the talks this year were really great. I'm just going to go straight to the overall winner. It was a pretty clear winner this year, and we had almost 50 votes. Thank you for that. How many of those were repeats? I don't know. I hope none. Okay. The best presentation this year goes to Tor's Usability and Censorship Circumvention with Linda Lee and David Fitfield. Here's your prize pack. There you go. So thanks again, everyone. Sir, go for it.
Okay. All right, so I had some closing cat memes to put up that I think was really important to put here. Which is, I hope you learned something today, and that we hope you all enjoyed the company and made some new friends. Hope you had some fun. HotPETS is supposed to be lighter, and I heard more laughing than previous days, and I was encouraged by that. And we'll hopefully see you all next year. So thanks a lot for coming.